Okay, good morning, everyone. Making sure you
Morning.
hear me. And if everybody can please mute themselves with the number of participants we have today, we're going to have to ask that all correspondence be through the chat box because of the fact that we've got a lot of people on this webinar and we're going to try to get through everything. So you can send your questions via the chat box and we will try to get to them. We have a lot of questions already and we have them organized by grouping. So we will cover those as we go through. My name is Diane Blazek
I'm
and
not
I
seeing
am
Diane's
the
name on
Executive
this.
Director for
I couldn't
National
get me to
Garden
sound
Bureau.
him in.
And
It
okay,
said to
so sorry, I
unmute
hear
him.
some people
I had
talking and
muted
we're going to ask
yesterday
you to
during our.
mute. And so today, what we're doing is we're presenting our experts, our members, as our panelists, and they will be answering the questions for you that we have. And if we have time at the very end, then we will get to any additional questions that are posted in the chat. And don't worry if you don't get them answered, I'm going to download all the questions that are in chat and then send an email out to everybody after the fact. So that hopefully will be a very good way to get all your questions answered. So I want to get right in and introduce our panelists. They do have their videos on screen. So we'll start with Natalie Carmoli. She's the public relations specialist at Proven Winners Color Choice. There you go. She's got hydrangeas in her background. Next, we have Mike Duval, who's the Director of Products at Star Roses and Plants. There he is in a green shirt. How appropriate, Mike. Oh, and his screen says Leah Palmer, but that's really Mike. And then we have Ryan McEnany, who is our spokesperson for Endless Summer Hydrangeas and First Edition Shrubs and Trees. So what I want to do first is start with, I feel like many of the questions are dependent upon the type of hydrangea you have. So what I want to do is start with our first 4 slides, and we'll let Natalie, Mike, and Ryan talk about the types of hydrangeas. So we'll do that quickly, and then we'll get right into the questions. So there's our experts. Here's the 4 hydrangea types. Who's going to start for us?
If we're starting with big leaf, I'm at least happy to get us started, and then Mike and Natalie, please feel free to jump in too. But big leaf hydrangea, this is where we work most closely with the summer series. The big leaf is that mop head type hydrangea that you see, that classic Cape Cod hydrangea. Of course, lace caps as well would fit into the macrophylla category, and for the most common, at least, that you would find. These are the ones where you're going to have that blue or purple or pink bloom. There are some white as well, but they're a little smaller than the arborescens type typically for that flower head. So this, again, that the classic Cape Cod look. The picture here is Bloomstruck hydrangea, which is one from the Endless Summer collection. The one thing where we get a lot of questions, and we'll talk a lot about today with the big leaf hydrangeas, is that remontancy or ability to rebloom. And it's not every big leaf hydrangea that can do that. There are certain collections that do have that remontant or reblooming trait. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about how to maximize that and get the most rebloom. But the Endless Summer collection, who I work with, is one of those reblooming type hydrangeas where you're going to get that first set of blooms from old wood or from last year's growth, and then new wood or new growth from the current season as well. So Endless Summer, we've got 5 plants in the collection, started with the original in 2004, 2005 when that was introduced. We've got Twist and Shout, which is the lace cap type. We've got Blushing Bride, which starts out white and then blushes pink or blue depending on your soil pH. Bloomstruck, which is shown here, and then Summer Crush, which is the newest, most compact variety. Anyone else want to jump in and touch on some of the big leaf in your collections?
Sure. We also have a couple lines of big leaf hydrangeas at Proven Winners Color Choice. We started out many years ago with a collection that was called the City Line collection, and you may see that one a lot at your local nurseries and garden centers right now. The City Line collection is one of those that Ryan spoke about that only blooms on old wood. So it's an old wood blooming hydrangea known for really, really saturated color, and they're named in really fun names like Cityline Vienna and Cityline Mars and Cityline Rio. That was a hydrangea series that we started out with quite a while ago. Since then, we have been really working like Bailey does on developing hydrangeas that have that remontancy and that ability to rebloom. And with that, we have the Let's Dance series of hydrangeas. So those are also ones that bloom on old and new wood. They, like all the other big leaves, can turn from pink to blue depending on the soil. The interesting thing about our Let's Dance series is it used to all be Hydrangea macrophylla, and we've recently added a couple different cultivars that are a macrophylla serrata mix. So we'll talk about those later, but those are basically our big leaf selections.
Okay, and I'll just briefly touch on a couple of our varieties. We don't have a collection of series. We do have a brand called Bloomables that these varieties are available in. But I think the four I'd like to key on are one called Wedding Gown, which has been around for several years. True white flower, not affected by pH. It's always going to bloom white. Starts off as a lace cap and goes to a mop head and a very compact habit, 3 feet tall, 4 feet wide, so it works well in small places. We've got another variety called Cherry Explosion that's a lace cap. The thing I like about this hydrangea is it is zone 4 cold hardy, so it will take very, very cold conditions as well as late freezes in the south without the buds getting hurt. It is not a rebloomer, but it has a very long bloom period. Our strongest rebloomer is a variety called Double Down, and it's actually a double flowering mop head. Very, very compact habit, 3 feet by 3 feet. Hardy zone 6 to 9, and just a very, very strong rebloomer. And then we've had another variety that's on the screen, LA Dreamin', that's known for having a mix of pink to blue to purple flowers on it all at the same time. A little bit taller habit, 5 feet by 5 feet, and it is a mop head as well.
Great, thank you so much. We'll move to the next type, which is the smooth hydrangea. Does anybody want to address the smooth hydrangeas?
Oh gosh, I can start there if you want. We have been breeding smooth hydrangeas for many years. Everybody probably recognizes the name Annabelle Hydrangeas. So that's kind of the common name for a smooth hydrangea. That's the generic Annabelle. You see it a lot in Grandma's garden, the great big white mop head blooms. We started developing our Invincible series and our Incredible series of smooth hydrangeas in order to address the tendency that Annabelle has to flop over. So they have this great big beautiful flowers. It only has to rain on them like one time, and then all the flowers are on the ground. So we developed Incredible, which looks a lot like Annabelle, but it has great big flowers, I would say twice the size, and we bred it to have super strong stems. All the hydrangeas we bloom, that we grow, we breed to have really, really strong stems to hold those big flowers up, because the last thing you want to do is see all your flowers on the ground. So Incredible, and we have Incredible Blush, which is a pink smooth hydrangea. And then a little over 10 years ago, we started breeding with Tom Rennie at NC State. He was a wonderful hydrangea breeder, wonderful breeder in general, and he bred the Invincible. He started the Invincible series with Invincible Spirit and now Invincible Spirit 2 hydrangea. That's a pink Annabelle hydrangea. Invincible Spirit 2, we attached a cause to that. Every hydrangea that is sold, $1 is donated to breast cancer research. So it's a great hydrangea that it's got that pink color. It's got that native toughness that smooth hydrangeas have. And it gives a little bit to a really worthy cause for every hydrangea that's sold. Now you can see on the screen, we also have Invincible Limetta. So they come in a lot of colors, a lot of sizes. We have the very dwarf Invincible wee white. We've got green smooth hydrangeas like Limetta. And then of course we have the pink and the white.
Okay, Ryan or Mike, any comments on the smooth hydrangeas, or should we go to the next type?
And I would just add to Natalie's comments that the arborescens are known for their cold hardiness, zone 3 cold hardiness, so they work in a wide variety of zones, and I think that's important.
Excellent, because that's one of the questions we'll have in a little bit. Okay, the next type then is the Paniculata.
I don't want to sound like a hydrangea hog, but I'll start because I know that you guys have some paniculatas that are quite beautiful too that you're going to want to talk about. I'll just start with classic Limelight. You know, a lot of people have heard about Limelight. It is our biggest seller. It's we love paniculatas because they bloom on new wood, so they're super easy to care for. They're super easy to grow. They have that beautiful big panicle bloom. With Limelight, it starts out a green color. And then as like panicle hydrangeas do, they transition into a pink color as the season goes on. The cultivar of the hydrangea will determine how pink that hydrangea is going to turn or what shade it's going to turn, those blooms on that hydrangea. But there's also a lot of sizes available too. It used to be these panicle hydrangeas like Limelight, you're going to get an 8-foot, 10-foot tall hydrangea, but now we're breeding a lot of more compact sizes too. We'll talk about those later, but you know, Pinky Winky is also another one that we grow, and that's a great big lace cap style bloom, whereas Limelight has that dense mop head style panicle bloom. So there's a ton of choices out there when you want to talk about panicle hydrangeas, and a lot of really beautiful varieties across all of our brands.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just add a couple that we work with most specifically. Vanilla Strawberry and Strawberry Sundae are our best selling that you probably have heard about. Really, the difference with those is size. The Vanilla Strawberry is going to be that 6 feet, whereas Strawberry Sundae is a little bit more compact, starts white, and as the nighttime temperatures cool down, that's when you're going to start to see that strawberry color come from the base. The newest one that we introduced, and you can actually see it in the picture here, is called Berry White. It is similar in size to Vanilla Strawberry, but the color is just so intensely like almost Merlot red as you get further into the season. So the picture that's up here is just from my phone. So it's as good as my phone could do, but it's berry white in front. And this was probably early September, maybe, that I took this. This was just at our office. And then vanilla strawberries behind it. So you can see the color difference a little bit. And this is not even as dark as berry white can get. But as I mentioned, that color really comes in as the nighttime temperatures cool down and fall, and also making sure that that your ground stays evenly moist, stays hydrated, so they don't start to dry out. Sometimes you'll see a panicle hydrangea go from white to brown if it gets too dry, or if you're in a zone maybe where you don't get those cool temperatures at night, you might not see that coloration pop up as much.
And I would just add, I'm a huge fan of Limelight and Vanilla Strawberry. I've probably got 10 of each growing in my garden and have for several years. So they're great paniculatas. We do have a variety called Fire and Ice. The thing I like about it is a very compact habit, not as leggy as a lot of paniculatas get. Only going to get about 4 feet by 4 feet tall. So it does maintain a small compact habit, and starts off blooming late spring, early summer with a cream color, goes to pink, and then turns to red, a deep red in the fall. So 3 seasons of color with Fire and Ice.
Great. Okay. And it looks like then we'll go to the last of the 4 types that we have here, which is the oak leaf hydrangea.
All right. I do see that we have the Gatsby series up there. That's a Proven Winners Color Choice series of oak leaf hydrangeas. Once again, just like the Hydrangea arborescens, oak leaf hydrangeas are native to North America. Makes them nice and tough. They can grow in a lot of places because they're native. What we love about oak leaf hydrangeas is they have that beautiful oak leaf foliage. Not only they have those big panicle blooms, which once again can be mop head or can be lace cap. You're looking at a lace cap style one on the photograph here, but they put on a show late in the summer, in the middle of summer when they start to bloom. The blooms once again will transition in color, but the foliage in the fall also turns a beautiful color. So they have that oak leaf shaped foliage, the lobed foliage that turns a beautiful russet color in the fall. These guys can get really big, so give them a lot of space to grow. We have some that are slightly more compact, like Gatsby Gal is going to be a little bit more compact, 4 to 6 feet, but you got to give these guys room to grow. And they do bloom on old wood once again, so you want to keep them protected from any frost, and you want to be careful about any kind of pruning on these, but they are totally worth growing. They're absolutely beautiful, and I think we'll talk more about those later on too.
Yeah, this is one. I'm in Minnesota, and I'm so very zone 4, and this is one where I have zone envy. And we do have, so Jetstream is one of our oak leaf hydrangeas in our series, and so we've got it planted in our display garden, and it comes back every year, but it's not quite really zone 4 rock solid, but that fall color, even if we don't get consistent blooms every year, is worth it. The fall color on the oak leaves are just spectacular.
Diane, I don't have a dog. I don't have a dog in the hunt here, but it's one of my favorite plants, and it has amazing toughness. You can see it, you know, in Alabama going into Birmingham on the side of I-20, growing on rock cliffs and a little bit of soil. So it's a extremely tough plant that gives you great flower power, but then fall color is just outstanding as well on the foliage.
Excellent, excellent.
Can I add one thing too?
Yeah.
When you're shopping for an oak leaf hydrangea, don't be discouraged when you see that oak leaf hydrangea in a container at your nursery, because they don't love being in a container. So they're going to look a little scraggly, but trust that they're going to, you know, they're going to leap up and grow after a couple of years. They need to get their roots established in the ground, but they're going to leap up and grow for you. So don't look at the container and go, oh, I don't want an oak leaf hydrangea. This one doesn't look very good. They just don't like being in a container. And someone asked if deer will browse it. Yeah, a hungry deer will browse almost anything, but yeah, you're going to want to keep it protected from deer as well.
That's good to know. We also had another question about do hydrangeas attract bees and hummingbirds, or are they good for bees and hummingbirds?
I would say, yeah, bees especially more on the lacy type, where they have easier access. You'll see bees on them. When you're looking at like arborescens and the oak leaf type, where they're native species to North America especially, but we see them on our Paniculata hydrangeas. We see them on the macrophylla, but they're not probably getting as much out of those as they would some of the others where they have better access.
Yeah, hydrangeas have fertile and sterile florets. So the great big florets that you see that are really the part of the flower that you really love is a sterile floret. So what the bees are going to do are they're going to go for those little fertile florets that are inside. And that's the little tiny balls that you see inside your hydrangea. And that's what they're going to zero in on. And that's what they're going to want to try to find. So they're going to go for those lace cap ones more often because they can get to them more easily. You know, I've seen bees buzz around a mop head as well.
Great. And then we had a question about climbing hydrangeas. So did I miss a 5th type, or is that part of one of the 4 types that we talked about?
Yeah, there is. Go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, sorry. We don't actually have a proven winner's climbing hydrangea. We have some schizophragma, which is false hydrangea, which a lot of times you could mistake for a climbing hydrangea. But I'm not sure what the questions are. They're a beautiful plant that can climb up a tree. They do not damage a tree when they climb up it. They bloom on old wood. So but you're not going to have any pruning issues because they don't need to be pruned. And they're generally lace cap.
Okay, we have a lot of specific zone questions, and I think I'm going to save those because I may be doing a general release, you know, maybe a blog on specific zone questions, because there was a lot of those. We'll try to get back to those, but let's start with planting hydrangeas. First of all, what kind of soil is best for hydrangeas, and is it different for different types?
I'll take this one.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on the variety, they do well in a wide range of soils, but I think it would be safe to say that each of the four that we're talking about specifically prefer a loose, rich, well-drained soil, not compact clay, hopefully amended with organic material or compost. They don't do well in compact soils, and I think that's the biggest drawback. And part of that conversation is whether or not they're in full sun. Most of these varieties, in particular the macrophyllars, are going to do well in morning sun with a filtered light or shade in the afternoon. I think it's safe to say the paniculatas will take a little bit more sun. Most of the varieties do well in full sun, as a matter of fact. But the amount of sun they're getting is going to be important on the type of soil. If you're putting, I think it would be safe to say if you put any of these hydrangeas in full sun, especially in the afternoon in a compact clay, dry soil, they're not going to do very well. They prefer a very organic, loomy, loose, rich soil.
One thing I'd like to add is when you're planting a new hydrangea from your container, a lot of people have this instinct that they want to dig the hole, which is, a nice big hole for the hydrangea, and then they want to add all these soil amendments to the hole because they think that's going to help their hydrangea. And it really doesn't. So, use your natural soil that you have. Yes, well-drained soil. Hydrangea don't like to have their feet wet. But if you start adding a lot of amendments to the soil, you can end up with this thing called the bathtub effect. So you've put your hydrangea in the soil and then you put your mulch all around it and you water it. And the water seeps down to a certain point to where, except for where it reaches the natural soil on the outside. And then it stops. And it pools around the base of your plant. What you want to do is dig your hole, put your hydrangea in, backfill with the natural soil. So all the soil has the same compounds, the same mixture to allow the water to flow freely around the roots of the plant.
Anybody else on the planting or the soil part? If not, I really want to talk about the full sun, partial sun. It seems like there's a perception that they should be in partial shade or partial sun, however you want to put it. And we're finding that they're getting leggy and they're not blooming as much. So like how much sun, and if you can kind of address what it would be for maybe in the South or, warmer climates versus what it might be in central climates. Somebody want to take on the sun question?
Yeah, I can at least get us started. It really depends on what type of hydrangea you have. So I'll start with the big leaf, the macrophylla type, like the Endless Summer series like we have. You want morning sun, dappled afternoon shade. That's the broad answer to it. And like Diane said, it's sort of regional. It depends. What I can get away with in Minnesota is very different from what you can do in Georgia. The biggest thing is just to protect it from that really intense afternoon sun. It will wilt over. You'll see that. You'll get burn on the leaves, on the flowers. So dappled afternoon shade. If you're in a really hot, really intense sun climate, even more shade in the afternoon is good. So Minnesota, I can plant like Bloomstruck, for example, because it has a darker leaf. I can plant that almost in full sun here and not see too many issues with it. The further south you get, you've got to make sure that you're really, really protecting them. Any other comments on the macrophylla from the other two?
Not necessarily macrophylla, but we're talking about sun and planting in the South. If you're, a panicle hydrangea is a great choice for the South because they can withstand a little more heat. But if you're planting it, like Ryan said, put it in more shade because it needs to stay cooler. And if it's drooping in the afternoon, resist the urge to drown it in water. Like you see it drooping and you're like, oh my gosh, it's drooping, it needs more water. Stick your finger in the soil. If the soil looks dry, it's fine. Don't water it more because all you're going to do if you start spraying it with water on the top is you're going to inhibit its ability to be able to uptake water from the soil later on. Just let it rest. It'll be fine in the morning when it cools off.
I always tell people, because you have that instinct, especially when we were going to the office more regularly or out and about, you come home and you see it drooping over. Of course, our instinct is to go water it, but I say, go have happy hour first. Wait till tomorrow morning. If it's still drooping over when you're having your coffee in the morning, then you can think about watering it, but just resist that urge. And so that with, especially the macrophylla type, as they do wilt naturally, that is part of what their characteristic does. Some of that will actually help bring some energy up into the blooms too. So it's not bad for it to be drooping unless it truly is needing water. And you'll notice that by the next day if it's still flopped over once it cools down at night.
So we've got a question also about mulch. Should you mulch? How deep should it be? How often should you mulch? And what if the roots of the hydrangea are coming to the surface and visible? Is that a problem or not? Is there a solution? So it's like 5 questions in one.
Hydrangeas have naturally shallow roots. So that also is a lot of what we talk about with the watering. The roots are, they need a good amount of water, keeping in mind the advice that Ryan and I just talked about, but they do have naturally shallow root systems. So it's possible if you don't have a lot of mulch on there, yeah, you're going to see some roots coming through the top. It's not bad, but you should have 1 to 2 inches of shredded bark mulch or some other kind of organic mulch on the top at all times. That'll help keep their feet cool and help retain that moisture in there.
Excellent. What about transplanting or relocating? We had quite a few questions about that. Is it spring? Is it summer? Is it fall? At what age should you no longer transplant a hydrangea if possible?
I'll take this one, Diane. I think in my mind, and I'm sure there could be different opinions, but in my mind, if you were going to transplant a hydrangea, I would do it in late winter, early spring, preferably late winter, just in order to give it, it's somewhat dormant at that point, so there's not active growth going on. So if you transplant them in late winter, it gives them an opportunity to get reestablished with cooler night temperatures before they have to deal with the heat of the summer.
So what about size-wise or age of hydrangea? Is there a time where you just shouldn't anymore? Will they not survive it?
Well, I think the larger the plant gets, the larger the root system's going to get. I don't know that I could say that once it gets to a certain height, it's too big to transplant. It really comes down to whether or not you can get the majority of the root system when you're transplanting it. The root system's typically going to be as wide as the plant, the plant that you see above ground is. So if the plant's bigger than you think you can dig that hole and get most of that root system, I'd probably avoid transplanting it.
That's a really good point, that drip line. So when we talk about watering and fertilizing, same with transplanting, just sort of draw a line down from the furthest out stem, and that's the drip line. And when you're watering, fertilizing, all that is the area that you want to make sure you're hitting, because that's where the roots are.
Great. Okay. What about in containers? Some of these hydrangeas I know are just too big for containers. So I'm assuming that you would want the compact versions, but correct me if I'm wrong. And can somebody comment on growing in containers? How large should it be? Should they not be in full sun? Should they be in full sun? How do you prepare them for winter? All those things about containers.
I can start. I know that the others will have comments here as well. And so I think when you're choosing your plant, you have to understand what your goal is. Are you going to treat it as an annual and you just want it so you have one plant that's going to fill out your pot and it's going to give you color all season? That's okay. And then you get a new one next year and try something different. So size isn't as big of an issue there. If you want to keep it over the winter and bring it back every year, you're not going to want to put a vanilla strawberry in a pot unless you've got a really big container, because it genetically is going to grow 6 feet tall. So yes, if you're going to keep it over, make sure that you're getting a more compact size. And the overwintering process, again, sort of depends where you live. If you're in a warmer, more temperate climate, outdoors in a protected area from really heavy winds is okay. For those of us in the upper Midwest, bring it into an unheated garage or a shed where it's going to be protected from those really, really cold nights. They do need to go dormant, so don't bring them inside. If some people have an unheated basement, that's maybe okay, but don't bring it and leave it inside, because it does have to go dormant in order to flower next year. And when you do bring it indoors, if you're in a cold climate, don't forget to give it a little bit of water. It is dormant, so it's not in need like it is during the growing season, but about 1 snowball's worth of water a month. So if you have snow, just grab a snowball once a month, you're good to go. If you don't have a lot of snow cover, about a cup of water we see typically is enough to keep it so that you can bring it back out. And then wait till you hit your last frost, then you can bring it out. If you have a weird year like this where we get really warm, we've been 80 degrees in Minnesota and then had snow last week. So if that happens, just cover it up to protect it if it's outside already.
Ryan, I love that. 1 snowball's worth. I'm going to totally steal that.
I stole it from one of our sales reps that lives in South Dakota, where they've got even more snow. So it's great. It makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I would also echo, choose if you want to, I mean, first of all, how big of a container do you want to fill, right? But choose a nice large container. If you're going to overwinter it, choose a container that is made to withstand a winter. I would also bring it inside. This is a great way. I bought a City Line Mars because I really wanted a City Line Mars because they have that variegated bloom. And I really wanted one, but it blooms on old wood. So I bought it and I put it in a large container. So all I have to do in the wintertime is pull it into my garage and I can make sure that those buds are going to be protected. But, we all make hydrangeas that are a nice compact size. We are coming out with a couple of brand new hydrangea macrophylla called Wee Bit Giddy and Wee Bit Grumpy. They only get to be about 2.5 feet tall and wide. They're perfect for a container. So, look at your hydrangeas that you're putting in there, choose them according to the size of how big they're going to get at maturity. But even beyond that, I wouldn't recommend leaving them in a container more than 3 to 5 years. Unless you want to get rid of them, think about where you're going to transplant them, because your soil, you're going to want to give them some nutrients at the beginning of the season, but that soil is going to get depleted and their roots are going to want to spread out more no matter what size hydrangea you're putting in a container.
I think that transplanting comment is really important. And I think that this is using hydrangeas in pots is a great way to test things out too. You want to see how it responds to the sunlight in one part of your garden, put it in a container in that spot for a year and see if it thrives. If it does, throw it in the ground in fall, let it get its roots settled in so that it overwinters there. You can also use containers in the landscape to elevate it. So if it's a naturally compact variety, like some that Natalie was mentioning, we've got one called Summer Crush that only gets 2-3 feet tall at maturity. But you don't have a really good spot in the front of your border. Find a spot in the middle of your garden, wherever you've got that opening, put it in a pot, and that raises it up to bring that color to different areas in the garden.
Yeah,
Great.
Diane, I would just add that if you are looking to put hydrangeas in containers, I would definitely go with a strong rebloomer so that you've got, and the macrophylla, so that you've got an extended season of color. And I have actually, Ryan, grown vanilla strawberry in containers, and it's done very well for me. To Natalie's point, though, at some point, the problem with growing in containers is eventually the root system is going to become so big and so established that you get to a point where there's no soil left in the container. And unless you're going to want to water it 3 or 4 times a day, you need to plan on putting that plant in the ground, 3 or 4 or 5 years out.
Great. Okay. So I think everybody would agree that I think either the number 1 or number 2 questions about hydrangeas, number 1 would be pruning and number 2 would be about blooming. So let's dive into there. And I want to start with pruning, but I'm going to ask if you can kind of give a pruning 101, like what's new wood, what's old wood. So maybe let's start with pruning 101 and then boy, let's dive in. I've got tons of questions here on my sheet. So who wants to do pruning 101?
Well, if I could take the lead, it really depends on the type of hydrangea you're talking about. Hydrangea Max, especially the reblooming varieties, tend to bloom on old wood as well as new wood. So I would not recommend pruning them until after their first round of flowers. The difference between new wood and old wood, obviously, is that when the plant starts to flush foliage in the spring, that's going to be your new growth. If it's a plant that flowers on old wood and you prune it, say coming out of the winter, you're in effect cutting off some of the flower buds. The arborescens actually flower on new wood, So I would recommend pruning them in late winter, early spring before they start to flush out. And that'll give you a good, stronger flush of flowers. The Paniculata also flower on new wood, so that again would be that collection of plants would be something that I would recommend pruning coming out of the winter to get a good flush. And Hydrangea quercifolias, the oak leaf hydrangeas, flower on old woods. So my recommendation would be that after they put out their first round of flowers, you can prune them discriminately, prune the old flowers off or the spent flowers off, and you'll get another flush possibly.
One more variety we didn't talk about was, and I think we forgot to introduce it at the beginning, is Hydrangea Serrata or mountain hydrangea. So a mountain hydrangea is kind of like, I like to think of it as big leaf hydrangea's cousin. A big leaf hydrangea originates from the coastal areas of Japan. So it has that beautiful big round mop head flower that you like that can turn pink or blue depending on the weather. But Hydrangea Serrata has a lace cap bloom, and it's called a mountain hydrangea because it comes from the mountains of Japan. And because of that, it has a little more cold hardiness. They really hover around the same hardiness range, but they're a little more bud hardy. Mountain hydrangeas, at first, you would only find ones that bloomed on old wood, just like the big leaf hydrangeas. But now we have hydrangeas like the Tough Stuff series. They also bloom on old and new wood. So you can prune them the same as you would a Let's Dance or an Endless Summer or something like that. With old wood hydrangeas, and I know somebody said, how do you tell the difference? You got to get to know your hydrangea. I had some, I'm just leaving my house that I've lived in for 17 years where I have a hedge of Endless Summer actually. And right next to it, I have some old wood hydrangeas. And for me, I knew the Endless Summers were Endless Summers because that's what I put in 17 years ago. But next to it, I have this old wood hydrangea, big leaf hydrangea. It has a thick, waxy leaf on it. So that's how I could tell the difference. It has the foliage is very different, but cultivar to cultivar, your foliage is going to change, your flower is going to change. One way that you can make sure that you're never going to prune your buds off your hydrangeas is just prune down to the first bud. When they leave those blooms on for winter interest all winter, they look beautiful. And then in early spring, you're going to see that first bud on your stem. Don't prune it off. It's really easy. That my mom taught me that. Just prune down to that first bud and you're safe as long as the deer don't come along and eat it or the frost doesn't catch it.
Yeah, I would echo that when we're talking about macrophylla. And Diane, when we started this, you said, let's talk about, we got a lot of questions around pruning and how to get them to bloom. And they go hand in hand, especially when we're talking about the big leaf hydrangeas, because one of the biggest reasons people don't get blooms is because they prune incorrectly. So our general philosophy with with big leaf hydrangeas is just don't prune them. You're going to give them a little bit of a haircut in spring, but you're never going to really do a hard prune on them. And then you're going to be a lot safer. So we, especially for those of us in the north, again, when we have a really tough winter, it's going to take a little while for them to wake up. And they're going to wake up maybe a little bit slower than some of the other plants in your garden. So give it a little bit of time. You're going to start to see the green emerging from the base, and then they'll start working their way up the stem too. So we wait really honestly until Memorial Day in Minnesota before we even touch our big leaf hydrangeas. And yeah, you're going to have some brown sticks, up in the garden for a little bit, but it's worth it because if you cut it off, again, those flower buds were formed last year. You cut it off, you're losing your bloom. And the great thing about the reblooming hydrangeas is at least you'll get some flowers later in the season, but then you're waiting till August or September in a colder region before you might see that rebloom. So don't give it a prune, just give it a haircut late in spring once you see that green starting to emerge, and you might have some tip dieback. So once you wait and have patience, then just cut back to right above that first green leaf.
And I would say the only difference is if you do have a smooth hydrangea, cut it back by a third. Just cut that whole plant back by a third. It's going to encourage more vigorous growth, stronger stems, better flowering.
Thank you, because somebody did ask that question about cutting back to a third, and we've heard that with our trees and everything. So can you just repeat which one is it that you should cut back by a third?
Your smooth hydrangeas. So like your Annabelle Hydrangea, your Incredible or Invincible Spirit 2, those ones that have the mop head blooms, although we're coming up with a lace cap one soon, but they have the smaller florets on them and they bloom exclusively on new wood.
We actually cut back our paniculatas by about a third too. And a lot of it's just honestly for shaping, but if you cut it back and you're going to get some of those spindly branches that you got in there, you can cut those out, but prune it to shape it. And again, those bloom on new growth as well. So you're safer doing that. But like I think was mentioned earlier, we do that in late winter.
So you mentioned spindly branches. A couple people had said, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, that next year when my plant reflushes and everything, the branches are not very strong, and they wanted to know, should they fertilize more, should they fertilize less, is it a sun issue? So and again, I don't know if that's by species, so maybe you can address that.
Yeah, I would say species potentially could affect it. Some of it's just having that patience and letting them develop those woody stems. For those that do get woodier, so it could be sun. If it's too shaded and they're trying to reach for sunlight, depending on the species that you've got, could be fertilizer. I think about it like I equate everything to like food and drinks apparently, but I think of fertilizer as like coffee, especially when if we're looking at a reblooming hydrangea. You give it that kickstart of like a cup of coffee in the morning in spring, that helps it start to wake up and gives it that energy to reflush. Then you're going to give it another shot of fertilizer, like a soda in the afternoon by midsummer, to give it again that little bit of extra energy. You don't want to over fertilize though. Over fertilizing can burn the root system, can put too much nitrogen into the soil, which is going to give you a really great green plant. But if you want a green shrub, you buy a green shrub and not a hydrangea. So making sure that you're not over fertilizing, but by skipping fertilizer, you also could maybe start to see some spindly growth or less blooms.
Okay, so what we're hearing is basically fertilize 2 times per year, once in the spring, once midsummer. And do you have any suggestions on the type of fertilizer?
So I would say that at least those 2 times a year with the reblooming hydrangea. I'm sure that we've got some other suggestions for other species as well. But yeah, we do that 2 times a year, especially to help with that rebloom. Find a bloom booster you're going to see there's the 3 numbers, the NPK ratio, one that's got a little more phosphorus, which is that middle number. If you've got a really high nitrogen content, again, you're going to see greener growth. If you've got just a balanced 10-10-10, that's going to do the trick as well, but you're going to see bloom booster. The one thing I would caution people on is there are some fertilizers you'll find in garden centers that have a hydrangea on the cover, but then if you look at the NPK ratio, it's all nitrogen. So there's a disconnect there. So just check that NPK ratio, look for that middle number to be a little bit higher. At home, I use Espelma, I think it's Flower Tone. It's their bloom booster one. And I think that it's like 3-4-5 is the NPK ratio there. So that's what I use at home. I'm not sure if the others have suggestions as well, and for the other species.
I mean, honestly, we say just the same, 10-10-10 fertilizer applied early in the spring. We say early in the summer, not really July or later should you fertilize. If you fertilize too late, what you're going to end up doing is, like we said, pushing a lot of that leaf growth. The leaves are going to go, yes, the plant's going to go, yes, more fertilizer, I want to grow. But then the leaves are going to grow, the flowers are not going to grow as much. And what you might end up doing if you fertilize too late is pushing new growth so late into the season that your shrub can't harden off the way it's supposed to in the wintertime. So I would advise against too late. Of course, it depends on where you live, right? And when your plant hardens off. But we fertilize early in the spring. Any fertilizer that's made for a slow release fertilizer that's made for woody ornamentals, a rose fertilizer would work fine, you know, according to the package directions. Like all three of us already talked about over that entire root base of your plant.
Awesome. Okay, so now one of the questions, not one of them, many questions is, I don't know what kind I have. And in my mind, here's what I was going to tell everybody, and tell me if you agree. I would just not bloom for a year, see if you get, I would not prune for a year, see if you get blooms. If so, you know that those are blooming on new wood. And if you didn't get blooms, then you should prune next year, right? Because then did I say that right? Okay, so if you don't know what kind you have, let it go for a year. And if it blooms, it's probably a good chance it's blooming on old wood. Okay, because I had it reversed earlier. But if it, right? Is that a recommendation? I mean, if somebody just has no idea what kind of hydrangea they have, what would be your advice?
We actually produced a video exactly on this topic because we get a lot of questions that say, I have no idea. So we did publish a video, so you can check out in the summer first editions, and it's the 4 main types of hydrangeas. There are others, but the ones that you're going to see most frequently in garden centers, and then some general care tips. And so yes, it's very helpful. It's the most obvious when you can see the bloom, to help determine which one you have. So if you've got a smaller mop head or a lace cap, probably going to be in the big leaf category. Could be the mountain hydrangea as well, but the care tips are going to be similar. It's got the cone-shaped bloom, more than likely is going to be a panicle. If it's got that oak leaf, then you're going to have an oak leaf hydrangea. And if it's got the bigger ball-shaped bloom, most likely is going to be in that the smooth hydrangea category. Of course, there with all of our breeding work, some of those things get a little bit hazier, but in general, that's the most basic way, I would say, of identifying what you've got in the yard.
And I think we all have helplines, you know, and it really helps anybody that's giving advice on why does my hydrangea look this way? Why do the leaves look way? What kind of bloom is it? Is to snap a picture of it and send it to a helpline. We all have helplines available where horticulturists can answer that question for you. Sometimes just by looking at your foliage and the bud on the branch. So, you know, it's really helpful to see pictures when you ask those things. I don't know, Diane, if you were asking what kind of hydrangea across the whole spectrum of the different kind of hydrangeas there are, or whether it's old or new wood. But all of those questions can always be more easily answered with a photograph.
And I was going to say, what I will do is make sure that everybody that registered for this webinar, I'm going to send out links for specific pruning. I'm going to send out links for each of your companies where you answer a lot of questions. So the follow-up after this webinar is going to be an email that's as long as your hydrangea is tall. We will try to provide as much information as we can. We want everybody to be very successful with it. So the other thing about success, and we've already alluded to it, is blooms. And we know pruning is absolutely important in blooms. The fertilization is. So is there anything else that you want to talk about with blooms? I heard a lot of people saying, hey, it bloomed great the first year or two and then not after that, which again, may be a fertilization, maybe a pruning issue, maybe a location issue. But if all three of you can kind of talk about how to get more blooms.
I'll start out. You know, I think we spend a lot of time talking about proper pruning and timing. I think that's going to be the key, is making sure, depending on the variety you have, when you're pruning them, and understanding the difference between new growth or new wood and old wood. And certainly a fertilizer that promotes blooming that's high in phosphorus and potassium would be my recommendations.
Yeah, this is another one where we actually put a video together as well, saying because that is our number one question, is why isn't my hydrangea blooming? So we look at these top categories: pruning, fertilizing, site, so where you plant it, a little bit about soil, and then watering as well, making sure that you're not over watering. Again, when you come and see it flopping and you go and over water it, that can help, or that can inhibit or prohibit blooms as well.
Yeah, we actually have a document called Why Isn't My Hydrangea Blooming? That's got a neat little thing that asks you questions and leads you down to reasons, what type of hydrangea you are. It identifies the type of hydrangeas. I'm sure Diane's going to make this available, but there's a whole host of reasons why your hydrangea might not be blooming. You could be doing everything right and a deer comes along and just nips off all the buds on your hydrangea, and those darn deer. But you want to make sure they get plenty of sun. That's, that they get the proper amount of sun. Your hydrangea is not going to bloom if it isn't getting 4 to 6 hours of sun a day, preferably in the, I have mine planted like against my house so their feet so they get some morning sun. And then in the afternoon, they can keep their feet cool and cool off in the afternoon hot sun. But they need plenty of sun, and they need to be pruned properly. But there's a whole host of reasons why you might not be seeing flowering. Maybe your shrub's just too young. Sometimes you put a hydrangea in and it looks beautiful when you bought it at the garden center because it sat in a nursery and they made it look beautiful for you, so you would buy it. It doesn't mean it's a bad shrub. It just means you have to give it a couple years in your garden to get its root system established so that it can start blooming regularly. So don't give up on it just because it doesn't bloom the second or third year after you put it in your garden.
And I think,
go ahead, Brian.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's a misperception maybe on hydrangeas being shade plants, but shade is really a relative term. And if you put a hydrangea in too much shade under an oak tree with no sunlight at all, you're probably not going to see the blooming that you would want to get either.
Yeah, and all I was going to say was that all of these things that we're throwing at you might seem like they're really picky plants and really hard to get to bloom, and they're really not. It's just these little tweaks that make them even more successful in the landscape. And so following just these basic rules are going to really help you have success. And to Natalie's point, if you've got questions, if there's something weird with your site, just reach out to any of our brands on social or on our websites. We are happy to help. That's what we're there for. And that's what we want. We want you to be successful with them. And so we've seen it all. We've answered a lot of questions over the years. And so you're not the only one that maybe has this one really unique, weird situation happening. We're more than happy and love answering those questions.
And is there anything to do in the fall to prep for winter? And then on the other end of the season, what about some of the late frost that we get? What if I didn't cover mine? Not speaking for myself, but what if I didn't cover them, or what if they did get nipped by frost? So kind of a pre-winter and late winter question there.
There's a few things you can do to protect your hydrangeas against late season frost. I'm going to tell you, first of all, and this of course doesn't apply to ones that bloom on old and new wood. I mean, you'd love to have those old wood blooms when they bloom on old and new wood, but they will bloom anyway. But let's talk about old wood blooms and why that happens. So when your hydrangea forms a little bud on the stem of your plant, that bud is really, really hard. It has a hard coating on the outside. So it survives, it forms it the season before, and it survives all winter just fine. So why all of a sudden when you get a late frost, all of a sudden do you lose your bloom? It's because the weather has warmed up and that bud has said, oh, it's time to wake up. That hard coating softens up. The foliage and the bud in there are starting their process of coming out, and then all of a sudden you get a hard frost and bam, that bud is done for. So that's what's happening. So if if you're getting late frost, but you've been cold all spring long, you're fine. Your buds haven't broken open yet and they'll be fine. But if you've had a nice streak of long days, I would recommend covering your plants. I cover mine with bed sheets and Acco clips. Or if you have a smaller one, then it's in a pot, you could just drag it inside your garage. Another way that I've seen people protect their hydrangeas, and it looks like a lot of work, but I think it does work, is they create something like a chicken wire structure around it in the fall, and then they stuff it with leaves. And then when they're sure the last frost has happened, they pull that thing off. It's kind of funny. I did it one time and all my foliage was kind of yellow growing up in there, but it came back just fine and it looked great.
Yeah, if anyone has the chance, once we're able to be out and travel a little bit more, go to Heritage Gardens on Cape Cod. The Cape is like hydrangea heaven anyways, but Heritage has a hydrangea specific test garden. And so they've got all of our plants in there. You can see not only the historical varieties like you'd see in a traditional public garden, but they have, I think it's like 3 or 4 acres now that they've developed specifically with plants that are on the market in garden centers now, so you can see them perform in real life, but they are a test garden. And so they've trialed overwintering things like this, like the chicken wire, like just leaving them as is. And yeah, it might be a little bit more work, but it is going to protect them, especially when the plant is younger. So if a plant's been in the ground for 5-6 years, maybe especially if it's like a panicle, we don't protect ours in the winter. But if it's a newer plant, for sure, if it's got those old wood buds, doing that extra work to protect them, you're going to likely see some greater results. The other thing to think about is what type of natural protection you have in the winter in your area. For us, if we have a really solid year of snowpack, our hydrangeas are protected from the snow. They're not going to have the wind that's going to be able to get especially down at the crown of the plant. And that's where you're going to have some more of the damages, that fluctuation. It's more about consistency and cool temperatures. So if you don't have a lot of snow, that's especially where you want to pay a little closer attention. If it blooms on old wood, you want to protect it there. And if it's a younger plant, you also want to make sure to give it a little more attention.
Yeah, because we know Mother Nature is consistent, right? Mother Nature always has, exactly what we need for our garden. Yeah. Okay, so we're getting down to 3 minutes here, and I think we could go on for 3 more hours. But quick, what about fungal diseases? Is there anything they're susceptible to? Are rust, certain caterpillars? Can you just talk about pests and diseases and prevention in 3 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go quick. Hydrangeas, in particular macrophylla, have historically had some issues with leaf spot. But I think it's safe to say that the 3 of us on the call, one of the selection criteria we're using in selecting new varieties is resistance to leaf spot, resistance to powdery mildew. So I think what you're going to find with these improved varieties on the market today is you're going to have a lot less disease issues than you might have with some of the older varieties.
Yeah, and if you do, the most important thing you can do to keep your hydrangea healthy, especially when it comes to things like leaf spot or any kind of fungal leaf disease, is make sure you're not overhead watering it. Water it with a drip irrigation or a soaker hose, so it's just over the roots to keep that foliage dry. If you notice you have cercospora or leaf spot on your plants and those leaves are dropping off onto the soil, make sure you clean those all off in the fall when those leaves, because if you let that foliage sit in the ground that already has that fungus on it, you're going to just make the problem worse next spring because that fungus is going to start living in your soil. So make sure if you see any leaf spot on your plant, clean those leaves off. And it's not that hard. Just use a rake and rake around the bottom of it when it drops its foliage in the fall. But just keep those leaves dry and you'll go a long way.
Anything else to add, Ryan, before I wrap up?
Ditto. Everything they said is exactly what I was going to say.
Okay.
Okay. The only other thing I was going to say is I know somebody had a question about, and you said briefly, those caterpillars, right? Somebody has caterpillars on their hydrangea. And my guess, once again, I can't see it, so I don't know. One thing that's somewhat common on hydrangeas is a little caterpillar called a leaf tire. And it's called a leaf tire because it'll sit on that leaf of your hydrangea and it'll tie the leaf up around it in order to protect it while it creates its little family. And so if you see those, really the only thing you can do is what the person that sent the question in said, pick them off. You know, you don't want to see that on your hydrangea, but just pick those leaves off. You're doing the right thing.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So, woo, we have had a full hour. It is amazing. Thank you, Mike, Ryan, and Natalie for your information. To
We should
everybody.
do a telethon next time.
Yeah, I
Like
know.
24
Right?
hours.
Yeah. Yeah. So we will be communicating with everybody who registered via email. We'll send you links to this video, links to videos, and fact sheets and everything else that our 3 panelists have. Follow us on social media because we'll be posting a lot of these tips now on social media. We'll put it on ngb.org. We'll put it on our website and our blogs. But I just hope everybody goes out and buys like 10 hydrangeas each because they're beautiful. So they are wonderful. And thank you to everybody. This was a great day. In 2 weeks, we'll have a webinar like this on herbs. So come back, register for that one. It'll be very fun. And have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.